Welcome to Reading Between the Reels. I'm Craig Dickinson.
And I'm Matt Leader. Today on the show, we are taking a look at something of a cult classic, Attack the Block. Craig, what are some of your just initial thoughts on the movie?
So, first off, I have never seen Attack the Block until this last viewing. This is one that you recommended, which is always fun when we kind of have each other watch something that the other one's seen before, but the other one hasn't. My first thought is it's very British. I did not watch it with the subtitles on and kind of wish I would have. I could catch what's happening, but I'm one of those people that really wants to know every single thing that people say, even if it's not super important. But even so, I mean, it's filmed around London. It feels like it is. It's very self-contained. I liked it though. It started right off pretty quick. It's not very long either. I think it's like 88 minutes or something like that. It's pretty short.
Yeah.
I thought that the casting was really good, and I thought the editing was really, really well done. That's kind of my main takeaways from this. Ultimately, I think it kind of felt a little bit like a longer episode of The Twilight Zone in the way that it was very self-contained. It reminded me a little bit of Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, a little bit, especially with some of the disbelief around people that didn't actually experience what happened with the creatures and whatnot. But it was fun. I'm glad that I've seen it. The only thing I knew about it before was John Boyega was in it. That was literally all I knew. So it was fun. I enjoyed it. What about you?
So this movie was actually, I saw it a long time ago for the first time, and I rewatched it. And this was my first experience of John Boyega. And so when he was announced as one of the main cast in Star Wars, I was pretty excited because I think John Boyega in this film really holds his own. I think you can see that he's got some fine acting chops in this film. So I was like, okay, this is great. And not to sound like a hipster or anything, but I felt like Boyega was a bit of an unknown. I think it's fair to say that for his casting. And I think I could be wrong, but I think this was probably his biggest film up to, before Star Wars. And this is not like a super well-known film. So, I kind of felt like, oh, cool. I kind of know who this is because I didn't really know who Oscar Isaac was or Daisy Ridley. So this was kind of like, it kind of felt really cool to have this like inside of like, okay, they did some good casting on that film. I thought it was really funny. You mentioning the subtitles because I turned the subtitles on for a little bit. Did you end up doing that?
No, I made it all the way through without it because I ended up after a while. I was just like, I just want to just see if I can pick up on it, and I eventually kind of caught on.
It doesn't help a ton because they speak in so much slang that you kind of have to. It's almost like you're just kind of picking up the rhythm and the acting of what they're saying to kind of and like not all of it is like it's not impossible to decipher what they're saying, but sometimes they've got a fairly thick accent and I was struggling just to like understood like what they're saying, like just what word was. I didn't catch that, and sometimes you get that when you encounter people with thick English accents. But it feels very personal, like for a alien dropping down to Earth film. It feels like it's written by someone who grew up in that kind of borough and was kind of talking about some of their own experiences. I don't know how true that is, but it feels like a very personal film. And so I quite like it. I think it's very much like a shot of adrenaline. You mentioned how short it was. It feels like it whips by. Well, it doesn't have much breathing space. Like it flies from beginning to end. And part of that's just nature of being a rather short film, like not much longer than an hour, like hour, 15 minutes, something like that. And then it's over. And I think the effects are fantastic. And so it's just like a really fun action movie. It's probably a little bit more graphic in terms of violence than a lot of stuff that we've watched for this show. I will say that. So it's not like a Star Warsy,
No.
action adventure film. But for an adult audience, I think it's very good if you're feeling in that mood for action. I think that it fits the bill.
Yeah, it's definitely an R-rated film. I think probably mainly for the violence. There's a little bit of profanity, and then just some of the the themes. It's not a little bit more mature than some of our regular fare. That's true. I did want to touch on a couple of things. You mentioned where it came from. Felt like a personal thing. I did find that there was an interview that Joe Cornish, who wrote and directed this film, he did say that it's based on an instance where he got mugged that kind of sprung out of this, which is kind of interesting, I think. And then the other thing that made me think, as you're talking about the thick accents and letting things wash over you a little bit, it reminded me a little bit of like going to see a Shakespeare play, where you're like, okay, I can't keep track of all this, but if I just relax that part of my brain, like I'll be able to tell what's happening. And so I think that's kind of what happened eventually, when I just kind of just let it go. You'll figure it out. The action is, I mean, it's like I said, the editing is really well done. So you can see what's happening. It communicates visually really effectively. And so even if you're missing some of the colloquialisms or whatnot, you're fine.
Yeah. So was there anything cinematography wise that kind of grabbed your eye?
So, I mean, the opening shot has, just like from space, and then it pans down, right? And you get to see this tiny bright light dropping down into a fireworks display, which I thought was genius, right? It's Guy Fawkes night. That's when it's set. So there's lots of firecrackers, and firecrackers play a really important role in this film. One of the characters is very big on that. I'm trying to remember what his name was off the top of my head. Pest, I think. Yeah. So seeing that, how it kind of subtly comes in, reminded me a little bit of Cloverfield, how it kind of just subtly just drops in there. But I thought that was really interesting how you're paying attention to that, and then it blends it in. Like, well, this is how this would be missed by a lot of people, And I thought that ultimately this movie does a really good job of not showing you things. We've seen some of these films, like Jurassic Park was the same way, and Jaws too, where you're getting, I mean, the creatures themselves are super dark. So you're seeing a lot of them like silhouetted. There's a lot of smoke in certain instances. There was some great, I thought, composition though, where you have, I always like to see, the largest thing on screen is the most important thing. There's a shot where the alien fills almost all of the screen from the right as it's ripping out this guy's throat, which also made me happy because bad guy from the right, good guy on the left. That was kind of fun. What about you? What are some of the cinematography things that you liked?
First is just the use of lighting and color. And you kind of mentioned it where, these aliens, and they mention it like canonically within the film, but they're like pitch black, which I think is was probably like a little bit of a cheat on the CGI effects department side, right? Because it probably makes it pretty easy to like hide some of the, props, whatever they used, or CGI, whatever it was, that makes it a little easier. But on a fundamental level, when you're thinking about light and color, darkness, being afraid of the dark, that's kind of a fundamental human fear. It kind of fits perfectly with the story that's being told. So like I appreciated that aspect of it. The fact that the monsters have those glowing blue teeth, I think is a wonderful sort of like little, not catchphrase, but it's a little signifier of the monster, right? So one of my favorite shots in the film is towards the end when the head gangster hi-hats.
Yep.
He confronts the party in Ron's apartment. And I think it's like the third time in the film where they do like a, look behind you. No, really, look behind you. And the camera, you can see, where it's like all the glowing blue teeth that are just outlining the giant window behind the gangster. And like that, it perfectly communicates the situation. I love the fact that early on you see the blue lights and they look like eyes at first, and they're not, they're teeth. And that to me was just like a a really fun like wink and a nod using the lack of light to kind of trick, because it adds some to that mystery of like, what is this thing? And that's a pretty big like central piece in this movie, like trying to figure out, like the characters are trying to figure out what these things are, what they're after, which, you know, eventually they kind of do. But it's all kind of the lighting and the color, it all adds to that mystery and them trying to figure it out.
Nice. I had a couple other camera things that I just thought of too. There's for the most part, it's not really dramatic in the way that they use the camera. It's pretty straightforward in what they do camera work, but there are a couple instances that are really like, there's the handheld camera, which again can be, that's a tricky thing to use that or overuse that. But they're following the gang down the stairs the first time they're going to go investigate the landings, which is, again, are they super brave or are they just really foolish or are they just bored? I don't know, but it's like, what are you guys doing? Oh my gosh. But following them down there is really cool and very immersive. But the thing, and I thought you were going to mention this actually, but in the scene where Hi-Hats dies, they all come in through the window and then he's on the floor and then the camera is way up, it's bird's eye view and it's kind of rotating through and you can see the monsters kind of coming in from different corners and they're super black. So it's almost like the lens is kind of contracting back and forth. And I just thought that was I think that's one of my favorite shots in this.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. I think you already mentioned it, but there's a lot of darkness in the film. Mm-hmm. And I like that from like a setting and design perspective as well, because thinking about, and I actually use this example from one of the Harry Potter films, where they use lighting, like these flickering lights as kind of a sign of insecurity, danger. And it's the same exact thing with this, where you have lots of, and I also love the fact that, you know, the movie starts out with this very scary but real world danger of the mugging, and then it becomes a bigger story as the story, you know, as the movie goes on. But the whole time you have tons of flickering lights. You can see like the lighting is playing a part in that kind of, we're in a dangerous place, but it mixes between it's a dangerous place because of the aliens and because of how like poor and like how horribly off these people are. And you can see that, like, you know, these kids don't have parents who are looking after them. Like, we even see the parents, or at least some of them. And it's like, okay, be back in 10 minutes. Okay, mom. And he's gone for like the whole night.
Yeah.
And, you know, all these things where it's just like, it's kind of flirting back and forth between these two issues of like the real life, you know, not having enough money, not being in a good place, and the danger of the aliens too.
Right. And this is one thing that I was going to mention earlier, but I'll mention it now too, is there's a little bit of social commentary going on with this too, where you have this kind of inversion where you see, you know, it starts off with this mugging you know, we look at these hoodlums essentially as these are the bad guys and Jodie Whittaker's character is the good guy. And then it turns out, no, actually, like these are protagonists, right? There is kind of reason that they're doing this. And we kind of, you know, adopt them, and then we start to see the world through their eyes a little bit more, which is kind of subversive and interesting.
Yeah, totally. And I do think that that's perhaps the most interesting thing the film has, is the fact that, you know, it is subversive that you are following the people who are doing the mugging. Those are our heroes. But at the same time, it doesn't like gloss over the fact that, yeah, they still mugged a woman at knife point. Like, right. And Jodie Whittaker's character makes that very clear that that's still not okay. And, but you do kind of see both sides of where it's like, you know, when push comes to shove, these kids are very loyal to each other. They feel like they need to stick together because they're all they have. In a lot of ways, it's kind of true throughout the film. And they do end up working together through necessity, which I think is kind of like, in a way, this is like a buddy film. Like it's a very dark, very graphic buddy film, but it still kind of is that, where you can see the friends, like they're willing to fight for each other. They're willing to go out on a limb for each other. And they do eventually accept Jodie Whittaker's character into the group, you know, and I think for them, they also begin to see her more as like a person and not just like a target as a means to an end.
Yeah, they end up finding out they have more in common than they initially thought. She's their neighbor, which is interesting. What about sound? Was there anything that stuck out to you, special effects or soundtrack wise?
Yeah. The biggest thing for me is I loved the weight of the creatures. And some of that was through that design, because we know fully a lot of the sound effects are coming from some person in some sound studio. And they really gave the monsters some weight, I felt. A couple times the characters describe them as like orangutan things or gorilla things. And it's like, yeah, they have that weight to them. And I think the sound design really fits those monsters and made them feel present, like real within the film. And without that sound and the quality that they did for the monsters, I don't think they end up being as scary as they are. Because simple things about like when the monsters jump on a car and you can hear like the thud that they make as they hit the metal, roof or something like that. It just adds to that realness, and it helps draw you into the film, along with the vocal sounds that they make as well. All of it, all the sound design for the monsters, I think was really, really good.
Yeah, that shrieking sound they make is terrifying. And then at first I didn't catch what was happening, that they're kind of making. It's like a cicada type of sound. It's like an echolocation sound, because I hadn't caught on the fact that they're blind. There's basically a radar that they're using. And that's a creepy sound too. And it's almost more creepy that they don't have eyes. Like it's like their whole face is just mouth, like it's just teeth, right? Teeth and ears. That's all they have. And claws, of course. It's just some terrifying, and that's it's an organic sound, which kind of going back to, again, similar to like Jurassic Park, where you have like some dolphin and some other snarls of other animals, and it sounds vaguely familiar enough, right, where it's horrifying, because like I can identify some of these things, and I get why it's scary. The soundtrack for this film was interesting. It's kind of trip hop. It's very modern. There's not a whole lot of like classical instrumentation or anything in there, and so it's kind of like a very, I don't know quite how to put it. It's felt very modern, like a music video almost. Definitely like seems like it's trying to market itself toward the younger generation, or again, kind of adopt that like, hey, this would be the music these kids would be listening to. There's also some interesting use of diegetic music. I think it's specifically a Brewis, the one kind of preppy stoner kid, where he's like listening to music on his headphones or whatever, and he takes it out, and then it changes the tone of the music from diegetic to from non-diegetic to diegetic. You can't quite tell. It happens a couple of times, and I always enjoy when they just kind of play around with what's real and what's not in that way.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would add to that is the fact that I think in monster movies, kind of in general, the use of sound is really important for kind of letting the audience know like what's going on. Because there's one specific moment when they're in the apartment. I think it was the first apartment, right after the kid got his leg bit, and Jodie Whittaker was like trying to patch him up as best she could, and she ends up like leaving when the kids are distracted. And she's going down the hallway, and you can hear in the distance the monsters moving around through the apartment complex. And like that right there is the monster. Like that sound is so important for like telling the characters, but also the audience, like what's going on, what the stakes are, why she decides to turn around and go with the kids, and that's just, I think, a good example of how important sound is, like, to the story itself.
Yeah, I like that a lot, because the character design is kind of almost vague in a way. Like it's kind of this black shape that it's not fully defined, and so I couldn't really tell you what they look like, but I can definitely tell you what they sound like. And in a lot of ways, that's, again, more horrifying.
Yeah.
The performances I thought all across the board were pretty good. I know these were a lot of very young actors. I know Jodie Whittaker, who of course is Doctor Who at this point, had been in a couple other things, but I'm pretty sure this was John Boyega's first role. There's a couple of other people I barely recognized. I know I'm going to mispronounce his name. Franz Drama, I think. He's Dennis. He's the one that gets his head cut off, and he's the pizza delivery guy. He'd been in The Flash and Legends of Tomorrow, so I'd seen him, but he didn't have a British accent in those, which is kind of that's always weird when you're like. And this is the first time I'd seen John, well, other than interviews, John Boyega with a British accent, and then I'd seen Luke Treadaway, who plays Brewis. He was in Picard, Star Trek Picard. I was like, I can't quite place that dude, but other than that, I'd recognize anybody.
Nick Frost.
But what's that?
Nick Frost.
Oh, and Nick Frost. Yeah. Nick Frost. Sure. Right. And it reminded me, it's weird. Have you ever seen the movie The Player?
No.
By any chance? Okay. There's a line in there where they're trying to pitch a movie, and the thing is, we want actors, no stars. That's what they're trying to do. Just talent, no stars. I'm paraphrasing. I don't know if it's been a long time since I've seen the movie, and that ends up not happening in The Player. Spoiler alert. But I thought in this that even though you don't have big name actors, that it works. They have these very talented actors, very charismatic people. John Boyega is incredibly charismatic. Mm-hmm. And it works. And I'm sure that's one of the reasons this movie didn't do any better financially, because like, whose name are you going to put on the top of the poster? But I thought that for the most part, they all did a really, really good job.
Yeah. I think there's like really good chemistry. So like they match each other and they play off each other really well. So when they're, like laughing and being friends, you kind of believe it. Yeah. And I think that's like, it sounds really simple, but it's like, that's really important for a movie like this, that they feel like they could actually be together and like be friends with one another. Jodie Whittaker, who's at this point not the biggest name, probably, right?
Yeah.
But at the time, she was probably the biggest name attached to that film. At least arguably. It's like she works really well with the other actors, and like everything kind of blends pretty seamlessly, and it feels authentic, which is kind of what I was getting at the very beginning of all this. So I think the acting is very good, and like you said, it's kind of fun seeing a film where you don't really recognize everybody or anybody, depending on when you saw this. And, but it's like, it works. And that's all that matters.
Yeah. And it kind of adds to the verisimilitude of it too. That's for you, Dan, that you don't know who's going to die in a horror movie like this, because none of them are like, you're not going to kill off your big star, but there is no big star, right? I was even like when Franz Drama got his head cut off, like he was one of the two gang members that I knew. And so when he died, I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't see that coming. But like everybody else, I was like, these guys are all expendable because none of them are the draw for this.
Yeah.
And kind of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you have any particular lines?
There's a couple that I really liked. There's at one point, Sam, that's Jodie Whittaker's character, says, we should call the police. And Pest says, you better off calling the Ghostbusters, love. That's fun. And there's another one. I think Pest is probably the funniest one. Somebody says it's a dog. He says, what kind of dogs are those? Dogs with no eyes, dogs the size of gorillas. You think them things are dogs? Go out there and try to feed them some pedigree chum. They're aliens, love. Just freaking out. So what about you? Did you have any lines that you really liked?
Yeah. At one point, one of the kids gets stuck in that trash bin and they're trying to text him. And they're like, I only got one text left. And one of them's like, this is too much madness to explain in one text.
That's fantastic. And again, this is not a family friendly one, but another one that I enjoyed from this movie. Again, it's not a family friendly movie. He says, we're going to Ron's weed room. Sam says, what's Ron's weed room? Well, it's a big room full of weed, and it's Ron's.
Yeah.
Was pretty funny.
What kind of alien out of all the places in the whole wide world would invade some shitty council estate in South London? One that's looking for a fight.
Yeah.
There's a couple like decent lines in there that are very just kind of observant, and they help humanize the kids, right? Mm-hmm. Throughout the film, because they're the muggers. So it's important to add some humanity to them. And I think the script does a pretty good job of that.
Yeah, I agree. I also thought the acting and the camera work worked really good in tandem with some close-ups on John Boyega's eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Very intense, like not blinking. And I really enjoyed Hi-Hat's face when he's trying to shoot up the monster in the hallway and he realizes the bullets aren't going to work because he's all cocky and totally, like this is all easy. And then it's just like his face just drops and you get to see, like for the first time in the film, you could see him. He's out of his element a little bit.
And speaking of that, when he comes out of the elevator and there's just blood everywhere and walks out and he says like, you might want to get the next one.
Yeah.
And he just walks off. Like there's a couple moments in there where I think everyone kind of shows their acting off a little bit like that.
Yeah, that was an interesting shot too. You just have the elevator door close and you just hear lots of stuff and you're just like, oh, that guy's dead. And it turns out he's not.
Nope.
It's kind of interesting. I thought some brilliant choices with like Moses's black and red hat, because you have these like wide shots and stuff to be able to identify him really quickly. So they're very intentional. Again, we're talking about identifying who these guys are and giving them personality, even though they're kind of nondescript at the beginning. Like, who are these guys? And then they kind of have these looks that they adopt and makes it fairly easy to figure out who's who.
Speaking of that too, one of the best moments in the film is when John Boyega is going over to the door to see like what's going on because he heard a noise, and he takes his baseball bat and like lifts his baseball cap up with the hat to look out the people. I just love that little move there, and then he looks out, and then you got the monster jumps at him.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, that's an interesting character beat just to take. That's not typically how people move their hats.
No, it's not.
Anything else performance before we talk about setting and design?
No, but I kind of have like touched on the setting a little bit, and it's just kind of urban hell.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed the graffiti right away.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of like, okay, this is not the best neighborhood.
Right.
They're in, and it's pretty immediate. You figure out this is not okay. Yeah, but filmed on location across London, which is pretty amazing. And at night shoots are not easy. No. So that's pretty cool.
And they didn't spend much on the film.
No. I had to look. Let me see. We looked up. Yeah, they spent 13 mil. Made about half of that back.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's kind of guerrilla in the way that it's filmed, a little bit guerrilla filming a little bit. I did like just the apartment furnishings itself. We're on a not in an actual apartment, like on a set somewhere, and that just felt lived in. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it's subtle. Like there's nothing that you just would necessarily go, well, this something jumped out to me or whatever, but it felt lived in.
Yeah.
And that's, those things that you don't notice are sometimes like the most impressive.
Yeah. Where it feels just authentic. Like it feels like a real place.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just like the aspect that it all kind of takes place in the same apartment complex, basically. There's a few parts out there. Speaking of, one of my favorite shots is, I'll throw this out there because I just remembered it, is when they first kill the first alien and they like put it up on like a stick and are like parading it around. Like that's just like a perfect little encapsulation of like teenage boys. Like, oh, we found an alien and we killed it. Look how badass we are.
Yep.
So I had to throw that out there. But like for the most part, it's basically just in like a couple apartment buildings, some streets. Like it's really, the setting itself is pretty small. But in my opinion, it helps build that kind of like the whole story is really about how these kids are having to try and fight and stick together like a community.
Yeah.
And the setting kind of reinforces that idea. Yeah.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of the movie Signs, the M. Night Shyamalan movie, where it's an alien invasion movie as well, but it only you so isolated. You don't see giant spaceships. You don't really see townsfolk reacting. And, unlike Independence Day, right? That's kind of the more traditional alien invasion movie, where this is more about the family and character development and those kind of things.
Yeah. To be honest, there's not much else to say. I mean, like, Ron's weed room. It's like,
Yeah.
they got that going for them. It's like, but a lot of it is supposed to be just like normal apartments. It's a normal street. It's a normal night, until it's not.
Yeah. I did enjoy the fact that there was a sword and a figure skate. The figure skate used as a weapon was pretty genius.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you get into Ron's weed room, you have the fluorescent lights, which I thought was brilliant. I didn't see that come. I wish I would have. Yeah. Like, why are they being chased? And then you get into this whole aspect of, they took the female and they got, marked by that. Scented. And so that's why, exactly. So that's why the black, creatures are coming after them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, this so makes, oh, okay. Now this, and that at that point, when that movie, I was already enjoying it, but that it took another notch at that point. I'm like, okay, there's a total legitimate reason for this. And now we have, an end game for this. We know kind of where we're going next.
And I think that's actually probably the most powerful part of it. Is like, it's nice that there's an explanation, but that provides like their way out. That like informs the last act of the film, which is kind of like a really cool way of kind of doing that.
Yeah. And then it brings in a couple of interesting things because, there's a lot of characters hard to keep track of who they are. But Brewis, again, who's the kind of the preppy guy.
Mm-hmm.
He's a zoology student who just, he figures that out, which is kind of cool. You had him in there. Of course, he'd be able to figure that out. But my favorite thing was the John Boyega's character is named Moses.
Yep.
And so he's the leader and he leads his troop throughout the town. And he also leads the aliens like into a kill box. And so I thought, what an appropriate name.
Oh yeah.
Like, it seemed kind of random and it's like, no, I was like, I bet this is going to happen. And then it did. And so that was kind of a fun reveal. And, we talked in earlier, I think it was our Jurassic Park episode. We talked about how characters sometimes we don't see change, but we see it revealed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, with Moses, you definitely see him revealed as brave and selfless.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't come off that at first, but he's definitely that guy underneath.
Yeah. I mean, I think overall, the film is really trying to get at something. I do think it's like that. It doesn't necessarily help that it's so short in that respect.
Mm.
I think the pace of the film keeps it very interesting. Like, I sat down, started watching it, and finished it, and it felt like no time had passed. And so I think from an entertainment perspective, I think that was great. I do wish we could have seen maybe even just like a little bit more from Moses, and more from that character turn. I mean, not that we don't get a good amount of it, but for what it's worth, I could have used a little bit more.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I was going to think to say world building wise is that they don't really over explain anything. It feels just like it's dropped into our world, which feels natural, which is nice. But you could stand to have a little bit more context for what's happening if you wanted to go that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then it ultimately kind of ends abruptly.
Yeah.
For me, they get Moses gets hauled away, and then but the people are chanting his name like he's some kind of. But a lot of people don't know what happened, and
right.
So it's like it feels like there could be a little bit more.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that was just he's getting recognition, and
I feel like that's probably like the biggest flaw for me is like just the abruptness of it. I think you said it pretty well, where it and like, but also part of me is like, that's why I love it, is because it's like a rocket, right? When you're trying to like make an analogy for a film, there's some films like the new Batman film was very kind of ponderous at times. Same with Dune, very slow, methodical, and that's totally fine. Nothing wrong with that. This felt like the opposite, where it was go, go, go from the beginning, and it never really kind of slowed down. And that's part of the reason why I like it, is because it was very bold in what it was trying to do, and they were going to cut any fat from it and show exactly what they wanted to show when they wanted to show it, and that was it. So I do kind of find that refreshing, while at the same time I do agree that it was, especially at the ending, kind of abrupt.
Yeah, and I mean, there's talk of a sequel, which is interesting. I mean, there's things you could do with it. I just hope if they do a sequel that stays kind of true tonally to what this one was, and they don't go for, a much bigger alien invasion thing or whatever. I think that would kind of ruin the legacy of what you know. It wouldn't ruin this movie, but it would kind of mess with what you're looking for. Like if you enjoyed Attack the Block, you want more of that kind of isolation.
Yeah.
Self-containedness.
Yeah.
Anything else? Final thoughts about Attack the Block?
I think for me, like we've kind of said, this is not a super well-known film. I would really encourage people. Again, it's rated R, but if that's no problem for you, go watch it. It's very quick. You could very easily watch this, after work and kind of forget about everything. And I think it's just a very fun film. Be prepared not to understand everything that you hear if you're American. But if you kind of know that going in and are willing to just roll with it and give the film a chance, I think you're going to enjoy it. There's good acting. I think the special effects are fantastic for the creatures, especially given the amount of money that the film cost to make. Honestly, I think some of the monsters they look better than other much more expensive films. Mm-hmm. So just a very fun film. Definitely give it a chance if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's an hour and a half. Yeah. So, much in the same way Army of Darkness was, just unplug for an hour and a half and, it's a fun ride. You don't have to think too much about it. If you like John Boyega, there's more to like here. You like Jodie Whittaker, there's more to that. It's a fun movie.
Totally.
So before we get out of here, I wanted to briefly talk to you about Star Wars Celebration and tell you why you need to go next time.
Let's do it.
Okay, so just because Matt and I have not talked about this, other than I told him he needed to go. So I just had 5 things I wanted to talk about, just fairly briefly. Was the first thing, and these are in not necessarily particular order of best to least to best or whatever. But one thing is the podcast meetup is the coolest thing that you'll ever do, because it's just random podcasters and listeners just all showing up in the same place. And so people that you'd listen to, heard their voices, maybe talked to on a Zoom call, or people that actually listen to you, like Mary Purdue came up to me and was like, "Are you Craig Dickinson?" And that was one of the coolest. Yes, I am. And you listen to our show and comment on our Facebook page. Which is cool, just to kind of hang out and kind of talk shop a little bit too. I met tons of people. I had never met Dan and Corey and Tom, and I met Dennis Keithley from Podcast Stardust and got to talk to him a little bit. Actually, quite a bit. We got to hang out a couple of times. And Anthony King and his wife from Force Ghost Conversations, and kind of talk shop a little bit, which is just, we don't typically get to do that. Most people that we hang with, what's a podcast? So that was fun. And it just, it's just one thing. And it was great. It was scheduled the first night. So after that, it's you're going to run into these people. Jeff McGee, of course, was there, and his wife, his girlfriend, Pam. So you get to kind of connect with people then, and then kind of have the rest of the time to do that. And one of the things that came out of that, my second thing, was getting to go to the Attack of the Clones panel on Friday. And I knew I wanted to go to a big panel on the big stage, on the celebration stage. And I didn't win any of the lotteries, which is typically how you get into the big ones. But this, for some reason, even though it's the 20th anniversary Attack of the Clones, they did not have that as the first panel of the day. So you didn't have a lottery for that. You just could wait in line for it. I mean, they also had, if you got into the first panel, you could just stay all day if you wanted to. I mean, it'd be a long day of just sitting in one place. So I knew they didn't sweep it out, but you could still do it. So I was talking to Dennis and Anthony about that. And Anthony was like, just manifest it. That was the phrase he used. We're just going to manifest it. And so we did. We lined up 45 minutes before, maybe an hour, 45 minutes before it opened. And then we got in to that panel, which was amazing. It was amazing from the beginning. Ashley Eckstein was the host. Anthony Daniels was there. Doug Chang, who's one of the designers, amazing designer, was there. Tamora Morrison was there. Daniel Logan was there. And then John Knoll, who is a special effects guy, and Matthew Wood showed up, who's a sound guy and also does General Grievous and the droids. And it was already awesome. and Tamura Morrison is amazing. And Book of Boba Fett should be better because he's amazing, and they should have just let him do what he wants. And then the last 20 minutes, Ewan and Hayden Christensen came out. And just, it was ridiculous. Like I've been telling my students, like I was breathing the same air as Obi-Wan Kenobi. So just to be able to kind of make that happen and then for them to show up was super cool. And then Dennis and I went and talked and right after and recorded a little thing for Podcast Stardust. So I'm looking forward to hearing that as well. We also did that for the Siege of Mandalore panel, which was one of the lottery panels. But we're like, you know what? I'm just gonna see. I'm just gonna try and do it standby. And lined up early, and it turned out that there was no lineup for that. You had to line up for the Bad Batch panel, which I was fine with. So I got to sit and watch the Bad Batch panel, which was amazing. David Collins was the host, and a bunch of producers and writers were there. And then D. Bradley Baker, who does all the voices of the clones, was there, and Michelle Ang, who does Omega. And at one point, they read a scene where D. Bradley Baker bounced between characters live, and he just kept doing the voices throughout. So it was amazing. And then Siege of Mandalore, just to get to watch the last 4 episodes of Clone Wars, and then have Filoni come out and do a Q&A for the last 20 minutes or so was amazing. The Mandalorian experience I did on Friday, which I put a bunch of pictures on our Facebook page, and there's some on Instagram, which is another thing that you had to win a lottery for, but I just did it standby because sometimes that works depending on the time of day you go. That was one of the big things I learned was if you're determined and sometimes you just get lucky. I got into that on Friday and I had to wait a couple hours to get in, but I had time. And then it was just amazing, screen used props and costumes. And a full-size N1 Starfighter was in there. So check those pictures out if you get a chance. And I got into the Celebration store. It was the same kind of deal. Just walked in, couldn't get a reservation, but I did standby. And then on Saturday, I just did tons and tons of panels. I just bounced back and forth. I was like, this was the day I'm like, I'm doing panel after panel after panel. I did a books and comic book panel, then an action figure panel, which was great. If you love action figures, it was like the history of the Star Wars action figure, which was super fun. But I think my favorite panel that day, there was 5 panels that day. One of my favorite panels that day was a Joseph Campbell panel where they talked about the hero's journey in The Mandalorian. Matt, you would have loved it. It was great. It was so cool. So they would just talk about how that's presented through Din's journey and different things. That was a lot of fun. And I was able to tweet to all the hosts of that panel or the guests on that panel and tell them how much I appreciate it and got lots of responses back. And I followed them and they followed us. And so that was fun. I was like, hey, we're teachers. This is what we're doing. This is right up our alley. We also had the Coffee with Kenobi podcast was that day. And then at the end of the day was the Trailer Park panel, which was Brian and Holly from Full of Sith, where they were just like showing old random classic Star Wars trailers, which was cool. And then that night, and this is the thing you really have to go for, Matt, we went to downtown Disney and like 20 of us had dinner and just hung out for like 3 hours. It was amazing. And talked about Star Wars and Celebration, but everything else too. Talked about sports and reading and had a bunch of awesome food. And there's some good pictures of this giant milkshake I had. And it was just fantastic. So really, more than anything, hanging out with people is the biggest reason that you got to go. To meet friends for the first time, sometimes meet people in real life, or just deepen those friendships and just to get to hang out with like-minded people was amazing.
Sounds fantastic.
So, I don't know if I'm going to England. Probably not. But next time it's in the US, I'm definitely going again.
Yeah, we talked about that. England might be a little too far away for us.
Other than that, you got to go. We got to go. We got to plug it.
Yeah.
Dan also said we should do a panel. We should write a proposal to do a panel about like kind of what we do in class and present that. Like we should absolutely look into that, and I think we will. Not for this next time.
There you go. But, first time going to Celebration, be on a panel. Let's do it.
Yeah, man. Let's do it.
Well, that was a great plug for Celebration. Makes me want to go.
Yeah, good. There's so much more. I don't have time to go into all of it, but yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was different than I expected, but Also,
in a good way.
Cooler.
Yeah. So I do have to ask.
Yeah.
You collect action figures for Star Wars. Was
Yes.
there anything at Celebration that you picked up for your collection?
I did not.
Remember that Jodie listens to this, not right away. So you have time to come up with a lie.
No, see,
wink 2 times if she's standing behind you.
They have shops of everything, little stands of everything, and they had any kind of action figure that you can think of. The thing I enjoyed the most was seeing figures that I had bought retail that I saw were selling for more than retail. That was fun. And I was tempted on a couple of them. I'm like, I don't want to spend $40 on that figure right now. So mainly I picked up t-shirts. That was the main thing I picked up. I had more room for t-shirts than I did for figures. And that's another thing, that you get lots of extra stuff just for free. I got a ton of posters for being in some of the panels. And then that last panel I went to, that Siege of Mandalore panel, actually it was the Bad Batch panel that gave away a poster. And we went downstairs to get it. Colby Mead, another guy, man. Again, I call out people's names. I'm going to forget people, and I apologize if we hung out and I didn't talk about you. And Colby Mead and his son, we went downstairs to pick up that poster, and they had like a line of people with posters like, yeah, we'll just give you one of all of these. So I got a ton of other stuff. Like I got a couple of Andor posters. I got all kinds of stuff. So yeah, you're going to get stuff, even if you don't buy it, which is crazy. But I was very tempted to buy a lot of other things, and just not right now. So
good.
Just yeah. It'll hurt your pocketbook, but if you let it. A lot. Yeah, if you let it.
So as we close, we just want to say thank you so much for listening. If you would like to connect with us, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook. Email us at readingbetweenreels@gmail.com, or use the SpeakPipe app on our website.
And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast catcher. We'd love to hear your feedback, and it really helps us get the word out about the podcast. And please, if you haven't yet, join our Facebook group. It's a safe place to share your thoughts and discuss all things related to movies.
One last thing. Our next episode will be a review of Thor Ragnarok. Send us an email or voicemail about your favorite moments from Thor Ragnarok, and we'll share them on the next episode.